Oh my gosh, I'm live already. Okay, I better get on with this then. Oops. Okay, let me bring this to the front. That's to here. And that there. Okay. Hello everybody, and welcome to UK Diesel Electric Railway Modelling. I'm sure, like me, many of you looked at the prices of Hornby's new product announcement yesterday with horror. I know it's a popular thing to complain about the prices of model trains, but I want to bring you I want to bring you some things I want you to bring you down to earth a little and have a frank chat. So this is going to be a short video that will hopefully enlighten you on some of the prices that we pay. And in reality, we're actually just paying the kind of prices found on the rest of the continent. I'm going to start by taking a look at this which one? Not that one. Hang on. Screen. Why is this so hard sometimes? There we go. Okay. So I'm going to start by showing you this page on the ROCO website. So if we look at this, this is a NS class 1600 locomotive, and if we look, we can see that this will cost you €230, just under. Now, when you buy the so 229, €230 is £192 at today's exchange rate. When you add on the VAT, that's £230, which is the price of the upcoming Hornby Class 91. So in reality, we're paying the same kind of price that they already do on the continent. I think one of the reasons why we often think we're being ripped off is because the prices have spiked so much in a short amount of time, in just a few years. But we only have to look at the last 20 years of the UK model railway industry to see how this has changed and see why this has happened. So if we zap back to the very early 90s, we can see a Lima class 33, 31s, 37s, 47s, 50s, 60s, 73s, etc. And they sold for about £20 to £30 each. They had no lights. The mechanisms were from the 1960s. They had pickups on 2 axles per bogie. They had rubber tyres to provide any kind of traction. At the same time, the American and the European continental range had the kind of mechanism we saw today. And in addition, the UK is pretty much unique for using double O gauge, which goes back to the 1920s, where scale and accuracy really wasn't of importance. During the 1950s and 60s, when ejection moulding was introduced, replacing the old metal tin plate models that were handcrafted together, they continued to use double O gauge because they couldn't miniaturize the Ringfield motors introduced at that time. In the 1970s, by which time Ringfield motors had been miniaturized, Lima tried to introduce British HO ready-to-run models with a Class 33 and Mark II coaches. Unfortunately, they didn't sell very well. British modellers wanted things to the same scale as their double O gauge models, and as a result, Lima get changed to double O gauge. Incidentally, the next HO models from Lima were going to be the Class 50s and 55 Deltics, which is why they have underscale bogies, which are HO scale. They only redesigned the chassis and the body shell parts. In the early 90s, there was a lot of American and continental layouts shown at shows, simply because the markets had changed their mechanisms to a central motor, flywheel, bogie towers, pickups on all wheels, driving on wheels, that kind of thing. So you had models that were vastly better, and obviously that, you know, they're going to be more attractive to operate and therefore to buy and exhibit. I remember seeing the letters page in Model Rail, which was a 16-page supplement to Rail magazine initially, asking why Brits couldn't have better mechanisms. And then around about 1984, I think it was, a company called Heljan put out feelers for modelers as to whether they would buy a HO gauge Class 37 with the kind of mechanisms that we see today. Sadly, there wasn't a good response. Again, people didn't want to buy something that was going to be too small to go with the rest of their stuff. If we'd have made that change today, imagine what what it would be like, because we'd be able to buy continental vehicles, HO vehicles, and run them behind them because they were used on ferry vans or whatever. By 1993, a new company called Bachmann had entered the market. They came around a bit earlier, but they really started to get involved around about 93. And initially they were selling models that they got from Dapol, a Class 03 and a 45. But a few years later they redesigned the chassis for the 45 with a modern mechanism with a central motor and bogie towers, etc. It was a bit more expensive in terms of, but in terms of the mechanism, it was a game changer. And they followed it up with a Class 158, which took about 4 years to arrive in the late 90s. It ran super smooth, it had lights on it, and they only cost about £45 at a time when you could still buy Lima 47s for like £20 to £30. So roughly double the cost of a pancake model. And they sold really well, I should know. I own 7 of them. During that same decade, the American Continental modelers, they were seeing vastly higher specification models, extra fine details, etched parts, detailed handrails, and also DCC, which was just starting to appear. The NMRA standards for DCC were set in 1993. But of course, higher standards result in a higher cost. However, because there's a much larger marketplace for American and Continental modelers, the prices became cheaper. And prices are cheaper the more models you make. So let's just say that just 0.1% of Americans are railroad modelers. That's 3.3 million modelers. That's, if 1%, a tenth of the size of Brits are railway modelers, that's 672,000. The estimation of UK modelers is about 150,000, and remember that there are also a lot of N-gauge modelers and O-gauge modelers too. In terms of pricing and details, UK modelers are rather insulated from seeing the prices of American and Continental models. The last time you went to the Wally show, did you even bother to look at the sales stand selling Continental models? I know I didn't. So, because the UK has a specialist scale in double O gauge, and this is mainly talking about double O gauge, it's going to cost more because the batch of models in a specific livery is done on a limited run. When Cada, Bachmann's owner, had delays in production a few years ago for US modelers, they took a UK production line and gave it over to the US production instead, because US stuff sells better, and that was the cause of Bachmann's production delays a few years ago. On top of that, there's been an upward mobility shift for Chinese workers who had gone from a sweatshop where they'd work 12-hour shifts per day, 7 days a week for a pittance in pay, to getting reasonable skilled labour wages, less hours per day, and more time off. But the better their lives, the higher the Chinese production costs. And then we had Brexit. Now this isn't about who voted each way, this isn't about politics, it's about the costs of getting things made in China. And in the immediate aftermath Brexit, there was a massive drop in the value of the UK pound towards the dollar, and we can see it here. Can you see this big drop there? That's Brexit. Now, when UK companies get their factories in China to produce items, like oil, this is paid for in dollars. Because of the slump in the value of the pound, it costs more to buy dollars and therefore more to pay for a production run to be made. In the early 2000s, I went to the US twice a year, and right up until and I would see, we can see here, look, these the early 2000s, and you could see that, the price of the pound was going up. I mean, at one point, £2.06. I went to America that year, and it was £2 to the dollar, which it. I remember around about, I think it was about 2006, 2007. I bought a £350 camera that in the UK cost £500. So it was a great, time. Unfortunately, the financial crash of 2007, 2008, Lehman Brothers and all that kind of stuff, it saw the pound drop from from 1.99 to 1.48 in a pretty short amount of time. So, but the rates were unstable for years. You can see it's bouncing up and down here. And there was a slow recovery from the financial crash. But in June 2016, we had the Brexit referendum, and, here it goes. It just dropped like crazy again. Just as things were, they'd been dropping for a while, but, it just took a massive tumble. So, so like I say, the rates were unstable for years. There was a slow recovery because from the financial crash, but 2016 we had the Brexit referendum, and there was an immediate drop in the value of the pound from 1.45 to the pound to $1.21 to the pound. Global markets are really finicky. So when the financial industry is unsure of what's going to happen, the value in businesses and currencies drop. Government politicians, especially Prime Minister Theresa May, giving conflicting messages about what Brexit would look like. Is it going to be a no-deal Brexit or a deal? And if it's a deal, what's that deal going to mean? And then there was the infight in the Conservative Party, which went through a leadership change during this time. Well, that doesn't give investors and currency speculators much to go on. As a result, the situation was unstable, and the pound would rise and fall. And you can see how it's just, you can see how it sort of dropped around this time. So this is the period after. This is where we're still trying to figure out what the hell Brexit is going to be. But then we had COVID, and COVID hit everybody. We live in a global marketplace. So with workers sick and dying, production slowed down for lockdowns, new variants resulting in more lockdowns, added to people refusing vaccines or mask wearing, leading to a spread of the virus. But we've been fortunate. I mean, if we look, we can see we've done quite well here. We've been fortunate. We've had a quicker recovery than most countries, especially Europe and the US. We had our government buying vaccines before they even existed, with the expectation that at least one of those companies would achieve their goal and produce a vaccine. It was an expensive gamble, but it was a good one to make. We were particularly lucky that we created our own vaccine, and the NHS has done a fabulous job of getting it administered. But each wave cost a financial slump in the pound's value. And COVID has also affected and impacted the cost of materials. Thanks to lockdowns and sickness, there's been less workers available to keep up with the demand. And because there's less demand, the prices go up. Ships travel slower to keep the fuel costs down. When the... oh, sorry, wrong one. Oh, why is that there? Yeah, so this is the price of oil. And I need to move that because I'm trying to keep on a theme here. So, where was I up to? I've written down a script, if you hadn't already guessed. So, yeah, ships travel slower to keep the fuel costs down when the global fuel prices rose from $52 a barrel in January 2021 to $81 per barrel today. The costs of hiring a shipping container have risen from $1,300 in 2019. There we go. So from $1,300 in 2019 to $1,500 in oh gosh, yeah, I've got this all screwed up. Anyway, it's risen over time, and then it was 4,000 in January 2021, peaking to 10,800 in September, and has now dropped a little bit, so it's 9,200 today. All these costs drive up prices. So when we see models that cost £100 per vehicle in a multiple unit and £200+ for a loco, these are the reasons. It sucks to to have things cost so much. I did a percentage calculator of a shipping container, 1514. That's 513% increase over for just through COVID. So like I say, it really sucks to have things cost so much. I'd love to borrow a DeLorean and go back to a time when you could get Bachmann 37s and 47s for 50 quid each, or Hornby 31s and 60s for 65, and buy more of the models I couldn't afford back then. But we don't live in that world anymore, and we have to reluctantly accept that this is an expensive hobby. If you want a cheap hobby, don't get into model railways, this isn't it. I foresee a future where we have less big layouts with loads of trains running on them, and find smaller layouts with fewer models. And if someone does build a large layout, there might be less trains but a greater emphasis on scenery and operation. Hopefully this has helped you understand the reasons for the price increases shown recently. So, it's not nice, but it's something we do have to accept, as reluctantly as that might be. Take care everybody, and happy modelling.